For years, Rick Sanchez has been defined by one simple idea. He is the smartest person in the room. No matter the situation, no matter the enemy, no matter the universe, Rick always had an answer. Even when he lost, he found a way to turn defeat into a lesson, a weapon, or a joke. That confidence became the foundation of his identity. It wasn't just what he did. It was who he was. And yet, after the latest events in Rick and Morty, something feels different. Something has shifted beneath the surface. For perhaps the first time in the entire series, Rick isn't simply fighting monsters, villains, alternate versions of himself, or cosmic threats. He's fighting a reality he can no longer solve with intelligence alone. And that transformation may be the saddest thing that has ever happened to him. What's fascinating is that this change didn't arrive in a dramatic moment. There wasn't a giant speech announcing it. There wasn't a shocking death or an obvious turning point designed to grab attention. Instead, it crept into the story quietly. The Rick we're seeing now still sounds like Rick. He still makes sarcastic comments. He still acts irritated. He still hides behind humor whenever emotions become uncomfortable. But beneath those familiar behaviors is someone who has begun to understand a truth he spent years trying to avoid. Intelligence can explain almost everything. It just can't fix everything. That realization would have been impossible for the Rick from earlier seasons. Back then, he treated emotional attachment like a weakness. Family relationships were inconveniences. Friendships were temporary. Love was chemistry. Meaning was an illusion. Whenever life presented a difficult question, Rick escaped into science because science gave him certainty. Equations produced answers. Machines followed rules. Technology obeyed logic. Human beings did not. Instead of accepting that uncertainty, Rick built walls around himself. The smartest man in the universe became emotionally isolated because isolation felt safer than vulnerability. The tragedy is that Rick wasn't always wrong. Again and again, the series showed him suffering genuine loss. He lost people he cared about. He watched entire realities collapse. He experienced betrayals that would break most individuals. Every painful experience reinforced the belief that attachment leads to suffering. If caring hurts, then the logical solution is simple. Stop caring. That philosophy became Rick's shield. Unfortunately, it also became his prison. Over time, however, something unexpected happened. The very family Rick viewed as a burden began changing him. Morty challenged him. Beth questioned him. Summer surprised him. Even Jerry, despite all the ridicule, forced Rick to confront parts of himself he preferred to ignore. These relationships slowly chipped away at the cynical worldview that had protected him for decades. The process wasn't dramatic. It was gradual. Small moments accumulated until they became impossible to dismiss. What makes Rick's latest transformation so heartbreaking is that it reveals he finally understands something he spent years denying. Human connection isn't a weakness. It's the entire point. That sounds simple, but for Rick Sanchez, it's revolutionary. Consider the version of Rick who once viewed infinite universes as proof that nothing matters. If there are endless realities containing endless possibilities, then every choice becomes meaningless. Every relationship becomes replaceable. Every death becomes statistically insignificant. That perspective allowed Rick to detach himself from consequences because there was always another version somewhere else. But what if that logic was always flawed? What if infinite possibilities don't make individual moments less valuable? What if they make them more valuable? After all, if every universe contains different outcomes, then the people standing beside Rick right now are unique regardless of how many alternatives exist. The experiences they share cannot be replicated exactly. The memories they create together belong only to them. Infinite versions don't diminish connection. They highlight how precious specific connections really are. And that realization seems to be changing Rick in ways he never expected. The most revealing aspect of this transformation isn't what Rick says, it's what he does. His actions increasingly suggest someone learning to prioritize people over solutions. In earlier seasons, Rick would often choose efficiency over empathy. If there was a shortcut, he'd take it. If emotions complicated a mission, he'd ignore them. If someone got hurt along the way, he'd rationalize it later. Now the calculation feels different. He's beginning to consider emotional consequences alongside practical ones. He's beginning to recognize that protecting people matters as much as completing objectives. Most importantly, he's beginning to understand that being needed is not the same thing as being loved. That distinction may represent the saddest truth Rick has ever faced. For most of his life, Rick ensured his importance through usefulness. People relied on him because he could solve problems nobody else could solve. His intelligence guaranteed relevance. As long as he remained indispensable, he never had to ask whether anyone genuinely wanted him around. Because that's a terrifying question. Being needed feels safe. Being loved requires trust. And trust requires vulnerability. Rick built entire dimensions before he learned how to do that. This series has repeatedly hinted that beneath Rick's arrogance lies profound insecurity. His confidence often functions as camouflage. Whenever conversations become emotionally uncomfortable, he redirects attention with humor, science, or chaos. Whenever relationships deepen, he creates distance. Whenever people get close enough to hurt him, he pushes them away first. These aren't the behaviors of someone who feels invincible. They're the behaviors of someone terrified of loss. That's why his recent transformation carries so much emotional weight. He's not becoming weaker, he's becoming exposed. The emotional armor that protected him for years is gradually cracking. Every meaningful connection makes it harder to retreat into cynicism because those connections provide evidence against everything he once believed. And evidence matters to Rick. Rick trusts evidence more than ideology. That's why he can no longer fully embrace the nihilism that once defined him. His family has become proof that relationships matter. His experiences have become proof that consequences matter. His own growth has become proof that people can change. Ironically, the smartest person in the universe is discovering lessons most people learn much earlier in life. That doesn't make him foolish. It makes him tragic. Because awareness often arrives after damage has already been done. Rick is increasingly forced to confront the cost of the years he spent running from vulnerability. Relationships were strained, trust was broken, opportunities were wasted. People who cared about him suffered because he refused to let them in completely. Even when he wanted connection, he often sabotaged it because pain felt inevitable. Now he understands something painful. The pain was inevitable either way. Avoiding connection didn't eliminate suffering. It simply guaranteed loneliness. That's the cruel paradox at the center of Rick's character. Everything he did to protect himself ultimately hurt him. Every wall became another barrier, separating him from the people he needed most. Every escape became another reason to avoid healing. Every distraction delayed a conversation that eventually had to happen. And now those conversations are catching up with him. What makes this transformation particularly powerful is that it doesn't erase Rick's flaws. He's still complicated. He's still selfish at times. He's still reckless. He's still capable of making terrible decisions. Growth in Rick and Morty has never been portrayed as a straight line. Characters stumble, they regress, they make mistakes. Rick will almost certainly continue making mistakes, but the difference is that he seems increasingly aware of them. Awareness changes everything. A person who doesn't recognize a flaw can ignore it indefinitely. A person who recognizes a flaw must decide whether to address it. Rick appears to be reaching that crossroads. And that's where the saddest truth emerges. For all his intelligence, all his inventions, all his adventures, and all his victories, Rick cannot travel backward. He can move through dimensions. He can manipulate time under certain circumstances. He can rewrite reality itself. Yet he cannot reclaim lost years. He cannot undo every mistake. He cannot erase every regret. Some consequences remain permanent. For someone accustomed to solving impossible problems, that limitation may be the most painful challenge imaginable. The universe contains countless mysteries, but Rick is finally confronting the one mystery intelligence cannot conquer: how to live with the choices you've already made. Perhaps that's why his transformation feels so emotional. It isn't about gaining power, it's about accepting limits. Rick has always existed above ordinary human concerns. His genius separated him from everyone else. Now he's being forced to engage with experiences that no amount of intelligence can bypass. Grief, regret, forgiveness, trust, love. These are problems without equations. Questions without definitive answers. Journeys without shortcuts. For years, Rick searched the cosmos for meaning, while overlooking the people standing beside him. Now the search appears to be reversing direction. Instead of looking outward, he's looking inward. Instead of conquering new worlds, he's confronting old wounds. That battle may be more difficult than anything he's faced before. Because enemies can be defeated, machines can be repaired, universes can be escaped. But self-awareness demands something entirely different. It demands honesty. And honesty is dangerous, especially for someone who spent decades constructing an identity around being untouchable. The more Rick changes, the more he risks discovering that the version of himself he spent years protecting was never the version worth saving. Maybe the sarcastic genius wasn't his truest self. Maybe it was a survival mechanism. Maybe beneath all the arrogance and cynicism was someone desperately searching for connection, while pretending not to care whether it existed.